All right, here we go. Risk management in cybersecurity. Um, Today we're going to be talking about risk management, and risk management is interesting because it touches a lot of things and it is layered. It has a lot of different layers. So um, it is important because it has the power to affect all of your decision making, all of the direction that your cybersecurity footprint goes in. And so we're gonna be discussing risk and how it works. So when we talk about cybersecurity, we in this context, sometimes cybersecurity means all these different things to all these different people. But for the purposes of this class, this discussion, cybersecurity to us kind of means the frameworks, NIST, CMMC, PCI, FedRAMP. Those are the things we're going to be concerning ourselves with today. So cybersecurity doesn't mean multi-factor authentication in this particular instance, or it doesn't mean intrusion detection or log analysis. It means how we are going to respond to all the different controls that have been set out by all these bodies, government bodies, corporate bodies, and how we respond to them. And each of these controls sets of frameworks have sets of controls, and we want to meet these controls and complete them so we get some sort of a score, 100% or 10 out of 10 or whatever it is, so that we can accomplish our goal of becoming what's called compliant. And then that compliance comes along with some sort of a manifest or audit or result that we are going to need to store somewhere. And the place that we're going to store it is in Lionfish, the Lionfish platform, or a similar compliance engine. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create evidence and artifacts, and those are going to be stored somewhere so that someone can review them, like an auditor or executive part of your company or board of directors, or some other your customer or your vendor. The reason why these are important is because this is what allows you to work on contracts. This is what allows you to qualify for certain levels where you can work on different types of secret or top secret or confidential or whatever.
Hey, Gregory, are
Sure.
you sharing your screen or no?
Is it not sharing?
No, no.
Sorry. Let me share it. How's that? Do you see that?
Yes, we can see now. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Sorry about that. I pressed the buttons. All right. Okay. And then again, we're going to be using that as a platform to track all those different controls. So risk management. So what is a risk? A risk can be anything from a disaster, or something that may hold up a project, something that may cause something to slip on its deliverable, or push itself out to be longer than it should have been, like for a due date. Um, and again, the risks of those types are going to affect everything. So say something is going to last longer than you thought it was. The risk of what that means is going to touch all the areas of your infrastructure. So let's give some examples. If you're looking to accomplish a compliance of 100% of your NIST or your CMMC or your HIPAA, and a customer of yours or a vendor of yours requires that you meet that level of compliance, and something interferes with that process, that's going to be a risk. So if you have inclement weather that shuts your facility down for a month or a week or a day or whatever, and you can't accomplish your goals, you would need to have identified that weather could possibly be a risk that would potentially be able to derail you. So you can break risk out into a lot of different levels, and the levels of risk that you create can be how you deal with risk and how you look at risk. And the first thing you want to do is have a risk approach. So your approach is going to be how how you come about looking at your risk. So you're going to want to use your logic when you create your risk approach. And so we have um, we have all these documents that you can ask Jeremy for, that I have and I can share with you about how you would approach your risk, what your risk methodology would be. Then I have your like risk assessment documents. So we're going to look at these today and we're going to go over them briefly, but these are all going to be available to you through Jeremy. You just have to ask him for it. He'll send you the links to these. And these are templates. Again, you can modify these templates to meet your needs. But you want to have these items as artifacts and evidence that you go about looking at risk in a method, using a methodology. So what is it that your risk is all about? It may change based on what compliance framework you need to meet. So if you're HIPAA compliant, your risk assessment may more be directed towards the protection of individuals' personal data. And if you're a CMMC framework, your risk may be more around intrusion and intrusion detection, or something similar to that. So you may modify your risk, again, based on the framework that you have, but you're gonna want to change the methodology and approach of which you evaluate your risks. So this document will really go over, like, it's a boilerplate, so you can add and remove what you need from it, but you just have to have some sort of a rationale or approach or reason for performing the risk analysis. You're going to have to identify what it is that your goal set is when you look at how risks may affect your organization. And then you're going to want to ultimately prepare for a risk assessment. And I have a risk assessment template included in here as well. We'll look at that a little bit later. But so your ultimate goal for performing the risk, the risk analysis, is in order to perform a risk assessment, and then you're going to want to create that risk assessment document, and you're going to want to bring that document forward to your management or your stakeholders, which might be department heads or leadership in your organization, and you're going to want to present that to them and get their feedback, get their, they may change the way they do business or the way you do business, or they may change the way that they operate based on the types of risks that you have identified. And then you will then hopefully remediate those risks, or at least prepare for those risks by having a risk, by having, how you react to the risk. And that reaction is this document here, which is going to be your BIA. So your BIA is the ultimate product of your risk analysis, your business impact analysis. So you're going to have in your business impact analysis all of the things that your risk assessment came up with, and how you're going to react to them. So if risk has an if risk has an impact on your company, you're going to want to make sure that all the things that are related to those risks are then accommodated for in your BIA. And people will ask you for this thing, and they're going to ask you how you came about fulfilling the information in here, and you're going to tell them, this, I took a risk analysis. I did a risk analysis of my company, and this is it. This also can be called, and you can have a derivative of this called a disaster recovery plan. So a disaster recovery plan is similar to this. It doesn't have a lot of different components than this, but I like the business impact analysis versus the disaster recovery plan, but you can and should possibly have a disaster recovery plan. The only way you can really formulate how to react to a disaster is to come up with some sort of a scenario at which you would derive the disaster where it comes from. So, for instance, if you have a hurricane in your area and you want to, you're going to have to analyze what the risk of course, of a hurricane is. Here in California, we don't have risks of hurricanes, so we wouldn't include that. We may change that to the risk of having an earthquake. And so an earthquake risk would then spawn all sorts of different activities that we would have to think about. So one of them would be, who's in charge? Where do we go for information? What's the method of communication? And so on and so forth. So you come up with a plan for all of the risks that you identify, and then you write them down in this type of a format. So it's going to be process driven, it's going to be policy driven, it's going to be risk impact driven. So you're going to want to make sure that you come up with the leadership, functionality, process, all of that you're going to put into these templates that I provide. And you're going to go over each and every one of your potential risks by assessing what they're going to be. How do you go about doing that? We have a risk assessment methodology document that you can look through and read. We don't have to read this verbatim, but it's just step by step what it is. Does an application potentially create a risk if it's going to go end of life? Does equipment potentially cause end of life issues or offline issues? If a server is down, what do you do if there's a vulnerability detected? If something has to be replaced, if a person has to be replaced, if there's some sort of espionage that occurs in your organization, you're going to want to have some sort of cause and effect document. How likely is it to happen? How often would it happen? What are the areas that we need to come up with that we need to use to counteract the risk? Who's who's going to be responsible? What are their responsibilities? What process do they need to follow? What do they need to be thinking about when they're performing these risks? So a risk analysis is pretty simple. You could just brainstorm and come up with this kind of, it's not, once you've gotten the ability to identify all of the different components of how you're going to deal with risk, it's really simple. Put down what it is. Everybody can work on this in your organization, what it is they think risks are, and then what's the likelihood of them happening, and then what level of impact. Are they critical risks? Are they low risks? That kind of thing. So if you're a person and you have to look at the risks of your own life, your approach would be, I'm in charge of mitigating the risks. I'm the person that that needs to resolve them. I need to resolve low risks at a certain interval. I need to resolve high risks immediately. So if I have a risk where I identify that for instance, that my car is having issues, that check engine light came on. That is high risk for me, right? Because I can't move around, I can't get to places. So I might put that the chance of failure are high because it's got a check engine light. And so therefore something has been identified as being wrong in my car. And then I might score at risk as high. And I might say, look, here's how I mitigate it. I have to take it to the mechanic, but that might be time that I don't have, or time that I need to compensate for, or I might have to collaborate with somebody like another person in my household that will help me get to and from the mechanic. And then when I do go to the mechanic, I have to say, okay, I have a certain level of responsibility. I have to be available to be communicated with from the mechanic. I have to make decisions whether or not the car is viable. Maybe the mechanic will tell me, hey, your car needs to be replaced, or it is on its last legs and it can't be repaired, or the repairs are going to be greater than the value of the car. Then I have to make a decision. So in my risk analysis, I would say, okay, look, if the car is going to be replaced, here are the actions I need to take. And then I need to say, look, I need to go to a dealership, or I need to go online. I need to buy a new vehicle. Here are the requirements for my vehicle. It needs to be 4 seats. It needs to have airbags, side, front, top. It needs to have, it needs to be red. It needs to have certain types of tires, whatever. So I would lay that down in my risk analysis. I would say, okay, here's what we would need to do in the event that we would have a problem. So you you have these forms, you have the methodology, you have um, all these different types of analysis components, but this also kind of bleeds over into another area called vendor risk. So you're going to have to come up with some sort of a risk analysis, not only for yourself, but for vendors, because your vendors may control how it is that you operate your business. So, for instance, if you have Azure or AWS, you have to look at how risky it is that if something were to happen to Azure, if there were to be a large scale compromise, or which there actually was on Azure. So you're going to want to say, okay, look, if we are in the Azure platform, that we have a potential risk of losing data, or we have a potential risk of having our data compromised. And so therefore, you're going to need to come up with an assessment of the vendor, which I've given you the steps for how to evaluate a vendor, what you need to look for, the process and ideology and approach you need to take, the methodology and from which you need to assess your vendors, and then the mitigation advice that this document will give you. So not only do you need to assess risk for yourself, but you also need to do a vendor risk assessment. I've even seen where a company has done individual risk assessments for people in their organizations that may be critical to, like the CEO. So I've seen a risk assessment analysis include personnel. The CEO may be lost, or compromised or kidnapped, and you would break out what it is that you would do in the event of such an action occurring, and then what steps you would take, what kind of, who needs to be communicated with, who needs to, very elaborate set of actions and activities that would occur based on the fact that a person was compromised, or removed or incapacitated. So not only should you consider your vendors, which you must, you have to also consider your own organization, and you may want to consider people inside of your organization. Once you have this risk analysis and risk assessment, risk approach, risk methodology, and vendor risk and individual risk, what do you need to do then? Well, once you've done all that, you need to then maintain it yearly. So every year you need to go through this all again and review it. because there may be new risks that come up in the wild. And the reason why you're looking at cybersecurity news feeds and cybersecurity information and things like data breaches, and the reason your eye wanders to those is because every year you need to make sure that you are in lockstep with reviewing your risk analysis. You may need to do another risk assessment, and where you sit down with that document and you identify risks. They may all be the same as last year, and therefore the process will go quicker, but they may not be. And let me tell you the situations where they aren't. And that's where, again, risk is going to touch another component of your infrastructure and your compliance engine, and that is through the vulnerability scanning. So your vulnerability scan is going to identify weak points or issues within your organization that need to be remediated. So if you have a vulnerability on your server farm, that would have been identified already in your risk assessment. So you would say, look, if we have vulnerabilities in our server farm, then we're going to need to take steps in order to remediate it. And then your risk management document is going to tell everybody exactly what to do, who needs to be notified. You might also have policies and procedures that you build around vulnerability, but they're definitely going to be tied into how you handle it through your risk approach. So if you have a vulnerability and you've identified in your risk management process that it needs to be remediated immediately, then you go ahead and do that. Now, if it didn't get remediated, or something happened, or you went in a different direction, then you're going to need to modify your risk management and your risk approach and your risk assessment to coincide with those new parameters. Risk doesn't only just affect this your digital footprint. Risk is absolutely going to include your physical environment. Um, you can take it from the perspective of, like I saw in the old days where people had their screen obscures. You would put a screen obscure onto your monitor so that no one who wasn't looking straight on to your computer could see anything. So everyone who was looking from the side couldn't see your monitor. And that's a really good example of like mitigating risk, is by saying, okay, look, we understand that, people who can uh, you know, eavesdrop on you or look over at your computer can see what you're typing, or see numbers, or secret plans or whatever. And so therefore we need to mitigate that risk by putting these different types of screen blocking devices onto your monitors. And that's a great example. And that bleeds over into like cameras and key cards and key fobs and YubiKeys and all these different things. So everything kind of bleeds out from your risk assessment. If you have open spaces, access is available through doors that aren't locked, people can wander through your facility, you're going to see that creates a necessary risk that you need to mitigate and need to work on. And then you need to, again, for a risk assessment with your vendor, you're going to need to create some sort of risk assessment questionnaire. So we get these all the time from other people, like Boeing and Department of Defense and Lockheed and Northrop Grumman. They'll send you out a risk assessment document where you have to fill out, all of your cybersecurity kind of compliance and items. So they'll say, do you use two-factor authentication? You're going to say, yes, I do. Do you have a lockdown facility? Do you have a policy for passwords? Do you have a password length and that kind of thing? Some of them get really intricate and detailed because they want you to meet certain levels of like encryption levels and that kind of thing. So you're going to need to also take that into consideration when you're working on your risk assessment. Some other risk items that you wouldn't think of are currency. if you're working in a foreign country, and you have a facility there, you may consider currency and viable, financial viability of vendors. You want to make sure that your vendors aren't going to go out of business in those other countries. You want to make sure that if the country is in a state of war or in a state of conflict, that the currency you're using potentially won't collapse, where you'll lose all of your capabilities. You may also feel like a hot zone where you have a factory, um, is an area that might be under observation by rebel forces and or insurgents, and you want to say, okay, look, our risk is that insurgents may attack our facility, or they may perform activities in the area that would shut down our business. Here's what we need to do. We need to move, for instance, I've seen this actually happen with Ukraine, where there was a ton of programmers that were working in the Ukraine, and people didn't make a very good risk assessment. They were like, well, what are the chances of them, being invaded by Russia? Very low. So they thought that's not a risk. And that came back to bite them. They had to, redo their risk of evaluation. And it's not like you failed and that you can't go back. They just had to do another risk assessment right away. They had to have a meeting and say, okay, let's do a risk assessment. What are the chances of Russia invading Ukraine? And at that meeting, they decided that it was very high. And so what they said was, okay, let's evacuate our technicians to Poland, or let's ask them if they can move more to the east, um, and see if they could establish all their offices in the east. And you were hearing on the news about companies that were trying to help, you know, their technicians, or not firing them, or not, outsourcing to a different group. They were trying to keep, by supporting them. So they had to do that. So it's okay. Stuff happens. If, all of a sudden a volcano were to appear in the middle of Los Angeles, it's not like you've failed and that you can't go back and say, okay, in the event of a volcanic eruption, this is what we're going to do. That's what the risk of methodology is for. It's not a one and done, and it's not a once a year and done. And if you go back and go, well, our risk assessment didn't take into consideration a volcano, you're like, okay, fine. Well, let's talk about it now. Let's implement, let's go through the step-by-step activities that we're going to do in order to think about what it is that we need to consider: personnel, equipment, facilities, finances, viability, mobility, all those things. You're going to take those into considerations, and then you're going to create a plan, BIA, or a disaster recovery plan, and you're going to put it into effect and say, okay, look, our disaster recovery plan in the event of a volcano is to do the following. Here are the people in charge. Here's a rally point that we've established that you need to go to in order, or everyone needs to leave the building and go to a secondary site that's in Nevada. Here's how we're going to accomplish all that. And you have a plan. So that's the best part of it. Everyone's going to want to see that you have some sort of a methodology or a plan. But where do you start and how do you do it all? It's all here in these documents. Your approach, your methodology, the template you're going to use in order to write up what you're going to do exactly, or also a disaster recovery plan, or a policy and a procedure. You'll see that throughout the entirety of your framework, it will call back to the ghost of risk. So everything is kind of risk driven. When you're in doubt, think about, well, how does my risk assessment and methodology affect this particular control? Because everything really is rooted in this particular thinking process. They don't want you to have multi-factor authentication for fun. They want you to have multi-factor authentication so that in the event somebody were to compromise one of your email accounts, or your login accounts, or one of your accounts in the cloud, is that you have a secondary backup protection methodology. Be in the event that the whole purpose of it is to stop someone from hacking into your data and stealing it. So that's a risk. Data that's been hacked and stolen. And how do we go about mitigating uh, those particular risk levels? So everything in the whole compliance engine is around this particular type of a methodology. So when you're thinking of where am I coming from? What is my direction that I'm coming from? Uh, my all the different things I'm doing in these frameworks. It's all based on risk. So that's the reason why we have really a good set of documents that talk about all the different components that you need to take into account: your contracts, your insurance, your finances, your auditability, your who's responsible, your performance, your reportability, you know, how things are all working, your liability, your contracts with your customers. Do they include you know um, risk assessment or risk uh, components? So these documents aren't small; they're not one pagers. So we have all of them available to you. They're templates you can use, but they're really going to push you in the right direction. And they're going to be all encompassing, which means that they take everything into consideration, which you don't necessarily need to do. If you don't even have third party or vendors, then you don't really need to do a vendor risk assessment. If you don't have facilities, you don't have to do a facility assessment. But here's the only caveat: I would anyway. I would do all these things. I know it's time consuming to show that you are ready for that next step or that next layer. If you don't have a vendor, I would still go through and maybe not do every single thing inside of this, but I would do enough of it to say, look, if I do get a vendor or a third party or a subcontractor or someone who is a contractor for me, here is how I would deal with it. Be ready for that particular next step. If you're just starting out, you're a small business, you're a one-man show, and you've got like a contract to make, barrels for a rifle company, and they ask you to be, compliant with CMMC. Most of the questions in CMMC are going to bounce off you. You're going to be like, I don't really do any of this stuff. I don't have a secondary facility, but I would do all of this anyways to show that that customer or that contract or that vendor or that or that company that is your boss, that prime or whatever it is you're working for, that you've taken all that into consideration and you've come up with a plan, even though it might be a light plan, to mitigate, to deal with, to report on, to analyze uh, all of those different eventualities. This is going to get you a higher score when you're completing your controls. If you have a control like how do I deal with vendors, and I don't have any vendors, but I have this vendor, um, you know, this vendor document that I would give a vendor, and I would give this questionnaire to them, and that kind of thing. That is going to strengthen your position. And if you don't have it, when you do have to get it, you're going to have to scramble to make it, and that's going to take time that might disqualify you from getting the contract. So we have risk, approach, methodology, assessment, and a business impact analysis. Um, all these things are documentation that, again, we can provide you as you request it. But where are you going to store all this data? You need a compliance platform. So you're going to want to use Lionfish as a place where you're going to store all your documents, all that methodology, all that approach, all the BIA, your disaster recovery plan, your questionnaires. You got to store them somewhere, and they have to be in an organized fashion. If you have them on a SharePoint or you store them all on your computer, it's going to be a disaster. So get a compliance platform so that you can, when asked by an auditor, this is one of the things the auditors love, the risk analysis. And by the way, it's something that that executives love. They love this. This is their bread and butter. So more so than like, encryption levels of your computers. They're not as interested in that as they are in this. So if you come to the table saying, look, here's my approach, here's my methodology, here's my business impact assessment, here's my risk analysis template, they're gonna think you're the bee's knees. They're gonna think you're the smartest person on earth, because this is all such good information that you if you had to gather it by yourself and put it together, it would take a really long time, because it took me a really long time to come up with an approach, a methodology, an assessment, and all the little different documents you need. I also have a disaster recovery plan if anyone wants to see that as a template. It's another 15 or 20 page long document, but I love my BIA, my business impact assessment. It's so much, because that letter, those letters, that it makes all the executives get really happy. So again, don't just pile all this data in one spot in a folder and say, okay, here's my stuff. Have a compliance platform. Have something where you can show an auditor, an assessor, an executive, a stakeholder, a task worker. Here's how we lay things out. Here's how the process of this works, and that's just almost required. It's like when you're in a kitchen and you don't have a recipe, and you're just calling out things. Oh yeah, use some flour. I don't know how much. Who wears the flour? I don't know. So just use this type of a platform, Lionfish or something else, but don't use your SharePoint um, or your computer's hard drive to store all this data. All right. Is there any questions about business, the risk? I'm sure you're going to love spending the hours it will take to read all of my documents, and understand how risk works. We didn't sit here and read them all, but I went over like some of the highlights of what you need to think about when you're doing a risk assessment, when you're doing a risk analysis. But you definitely should have a risk methodology and a risk approach that you're going to take. And when you show that to people, it just gets everybody warm and fuzzies, especially auditors. They're going to be like, okay, great. And you can create your own risk reports, but I gave you a template that just shows a really rudimentary way of showing, hey, here are the risks that we've considered, here's the levels, and and here's how we're going to mitigate them. Okay. There's like a transcript of this call. This call's recorded. Jeremy will get you anything you need in the way of these templates. He has them all. He can send them over to you. Anybody have any questions? Okay, Dewan Haynes. Yes,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
All right, beautiful. So, one of the things, and I'm interested in your perspective, one of the things I find sometimes different in organizations is that it's great to have, the templates, the format, and don't get me wrong, the Lionfish platform provides a lot of order to the chaos, I will say.
Right.
One of the things I find it's a challenge, though, is when you're dealing with organizations where they don't have a consistent risk appetite, meaning, yeah, we're going to go through the audit, we're going to check all the boxes, and we're happy, but what at the end of the day does that really mean? I'm going to be willing to spend X amount of dollars, but I have a specific threshold. I'm willing to let some things slide, and then there are other things that I absolutely are going to put my foot down and have to be able to address. And I think it's sometimes hard to find someone to actually define what their risk appetite, risk profile is, so that folks in the organization can really help address the issues that are impacting their cybersecurity program, impacting their ability to go out and get government contracts, those type of things. So I just wanted to know, and I'm okay if you tell me, hey man, you're completely off base on all of that, but I was hoping that you might have a perspective you might be able to share with us.
Yeah, everyone's risk appetite is the minimal amount they can do. Nobody's risk appetite's like, oh, let's explore a secondary site, and let's put it, let's put some money into that. No, nobody wants to do any of that. Everyone's risk appetite is super low, but your framework is going to require that you have a certain level of appetite. And so your framework's going to say, look, you have to deal with vulnerabilities, which means that you have to have a SIM. You have to have a vulnerability scanner. You have to have some sort of a ticketing system. You have to have a knowledge base. You have to have a plan to deal with, you have to have change control. You have to have a change control methodology. So yeah, their appetite's not going to be high for like hurricanes, or for earthquakes or volcanoes, but their appetite has to consume the basic minimal fundamentals that their framework is going to require from them. So I agree with you. No one is going to want to, okay, in the event that, there's a second coming, here's what we're going to all do. We're going to change over to Christianity, and everyone's going to be like, oh no, that's crazy. Um, so that's like that's not going to work, right? So yeah, no one's risk appetite is high. Everyone's risk appetite is low, but you need as an IT person, you definitely need to say to them, look, we have these basics that we have to do. We have to have a ticketing system. We have to have um, some sort of physical protective environment for PCI data. We can't just have a PCI computer laying out at it has to be locked and it has to be under, because PCI requires it. So if their risk appetite or their ability to look at risk is shaded by money and time and interest, you at least as an assessor or as an IT person, you at least have to come at them with the framework's basic fundamental requirements. And those will cost money for sure. And those will take time. And those will be, if they're violated, those will definitely be something that's going to ruin you from having a contract or having the ability to say, I have met this level of requirement. Or when a assessor comes in, they're going to be like, okay, do you have a ticketing system? You're gonna be like, no, I don't. Well, your risk there was that you're not gonna get the contract or you're gonna lose.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. Any more questions? So yeah, I'll wait for some more questions, but for the most part, risk is the core fundamental um, driver. It's the pilot of your ship, or your airplane. It's like the captain of your ship. Risk. So when you think about it, like a lot of the times when I was starting out, I thought, what is this for? Why do I care about this? What are they asking me to do this for? um they're saying do background checks on your employees, and it was like in my mind I was like, okay, go get the background check done. Why? Who cares? um but it's all about this. It's all about your risk footprint. It's all about what it looks like, and how you're going to mitigate it. Why do you do background checks? So that if you don't hire people who are criminals or who have questionable backgrounds or financially in bad shape, their credit score is like 300. You're like, oh no, that's not good, because then they could potentially be compromised, or they may want to try to sell secrets to foreign organizations or bodies. And you're like, those are real. I have seen these things happen. So if you're thinking these things don't happen, they do. They happen to small businesses. I just got a call on Thursday about uh, a company that sent money to a person who had compromised an email account, and had looked through all of their data and saw that if they made a certain level of request, they used a certain kind of form, that they could ask for money, and the money would be transferred to their bank account. They lost $50,000 from an ACH transfer. So, you know, you got to take steps to mitigate that. There's a risk of phishing, and you have to say, okay, how are we going to deal with that phishing risk? Well, you have to send people to phishing school. You have to have you have to be dark web. You have to look at the dark web and make sure that those people's data hasn't been put out there. You have to train them. You have to make sure. I actually had somebody change their policy to no more transfers of money over a certain amount without verbal authorization. So the days of just going ahead and transferring money were over for them over a certain amount. So over $5,000, then they had to get a verbal confirmation versus just having email. Even though they said, look, that's going to put a little bit of more of a pressure on our accounting department. And I'm like, well, would you rather that or lose money again? Yes, Dwayne.
Yeah, so yes, 100%. I guess my question is, what mitigating thoughts would you have for like what's happening now with like deepfakes, like the one that just happened in Hong Kong, right? You get called into a Zoom meeting. It looks like you've got people that you work with or in the organization sitting there. They're asking you to transfer money. And so you do it, and you find out that everybody's sitting at that Zoom meeting or whatever conference program it is. Don't let me slam Zoom. That they were all AI fakes.
Sure. Yeah. And so your risk assessment and your risk methodology and your analysis needs to include the deep fake, needs to include those types of of issues that are going to occur. There are going to be more of them. Like there was also a robocaller that was identified from Texas. That was President Biden calling everybody, telling them not to vote. So I mean, you have to have an approach and a methodology, which I've given you the tools for, but your organization needs to decide how they're going to react to it and what they're going to do about it and how much money they're going to invest in it or how much time, effort, responsibility, roles, responsibilities, groups, um, documentation, what they're going to do about it. So, you definitely have to present it as a risk for sure. Deep fakes, ransomware, phishing, where they ask for money transfers. Your organization needs to decide what it's going to do. I can't tell you what to do, but I have given you the tools for what you need to do in order to set up the result, right? So it says take all these things into consideration and then make your decision. Some people will be like, well, a volcano in Los Angeles is a possibility, but we're going to do nothing about it. That's just the way you feel. And that might come back and bite you later, but at least you had the conversation. At least you sat around and got feedback from your peers and that kind of thing. What are you going to do in the future to prevent a Zoom or a go to my meeting or whatever? You're going to maybe take different precautions, or you're going to have a certain, some sort of encrypted or cybersecurity based solution. Is that going to cost money? Possibly. Are you going to do it? It is suggested that you do. So yeah, all these different things are going to pop up. That's why you need to keep your ear to the ground by watching cybersecurity channels. It's like you're like they call it the chatter, right? The chatter in the field is that there's going to be an attack on Vancouver. So you got to listen to that. You got to think to yourself, if an attack on Vancouver happens, what are we going to do? I mean, you don't need to go to super extremes, but you need to say, look, we have facilities in Vancouver. Take things seriously, even if it's just a bunch of BS. I would still take a lot of things seriously and say, if Vancouver is attacked and we have facilities there by terrorists, what are we going to do? And at least have a plan. It doesn't need to be 100-step plan. It could be like maybe a 5-step plan, but definitely listen to what's going on out in the wild. Deep fakes is something that's not super new, but it's something that's taking over. AI as what I call evil AI. Evil AI is coming, so be ready for it. And I've seen it actually before where here's an example of evil AI. There was an AI that called some grandma and said, your daughter's in the hospital and she's you know, she needs a credit card because she's in a different, we don't have her medical insurance. And the grandma gave, you know, gave the money. She did a transfer of money to those guys because they knew she had a granddaughter based on Facebook, that she knew that they were far away from each other. She knew it knew all these things, and it just goes around calling grandmas. Hundreds and thousands of grandmas a day are getting called saying, "Oh, your daughter is in the hospital," and they freak out and they just transfer money. The evil AI is coming, so be ready for them. Be ready for that. Be ready for deep fakes. Be ready for you know, data leaks and compromises. And there's the biggest, I think the biggest data leak that ever occurred the other day. What are you going to do about it? Be ready for it. So there are, and there are going to be new things beyond deep fake and evil AI. The next level of pain is going to come. You should be ready for it. And the moment you hear about it, I would definitely run it through my disaster, through my risk approach, my risk methodology. Run it through, just shoot it through and see what comes out the other end. But again, you're having meetings once in a while with your team. And when you do have those meetings, you're going to want to say, this is a new risk, deep fakes, it's come up. What are we going to do about it? You can give a good example with what you said with, you know, with that particular Zoom meeting. So, or the shared meeting. So evil AI, you know, deep fakes, ransomware. These guys are they're gonna modify they're gonna morph, change into something different. So be ready for it.
Yeah, one quick thing, because I actually am a regional rep for the FBI InfoGuard program. We had this come up yesterday on a conversation I was leading. And one of the folks that was participating threw out a suggestion, so I just want to pass it on, is that they came up with a family safe word. And so if they received a phone call that said, hey, Gregory and Dewan are in jail, and I need Chad to pay a ransom to get us out, you know, Chad would say, really, Dewan, Gregory, what's the safe word? And if we can't provide it, then Chad just hangs up the phone because he automatically knows they've used deepfake to synthesize our voices and it's not really us.
No,
So
you're
he
totally
did that
right.
for the whole thing. Pineapples. All right. All right. So now we got it, Greg. If me and you are out and we're and get thrown in jail, the
Well,
word
I
pineapples.
know this. No one's gonna pay the ransom, even if the safe word is wrong or right. The ransom might not be paid for me. They may get you out, but they're definitely leaving me in there. But no, absolutely. I'm also part of InfraGard, and they do recognize that this deep fake or evil AI or synthesized voice thing is becoming a problem. So yeah, absolutely. Be ready for it. And you know, the I hear all the time about these email, you know, someone gets into someone's email and then they map it out. They map out the whole process from permission to the right person sending it to a document that looks like it was signed by the CEO. I mean, those types of things are happening all the time. I hear about them more and more. So be ready for it by doing your risk assessment. But again, it touches all of your organizational components. Any other questions or comments? But yeah, I would definitely take all the documents that I've provided to Jeremy and he'll share them with you and have them in your war chest because those things are not easy to come by, all those words. Again, words are difficult to come up with sometimes, but I've given you all a ton of words on this one in order to, you know, fight back against the auditors and the assessors. These words are great. This is the best set of words that they love, and this will come in very handy for you. Anything else? Anything else? I would thank everybody for coming and have a great weekend. I hope this was a good class, but you definitely got a treat on this one because you got all those documents that are just really good. Can't tell you enough about how hard it is to come up with, these documents. If you go online, you'll search and you'll find that they want you to sign up for their newsletter and all that stuff. Jeremy will also send out the links to this group. Of where these are stored. He has a repository of all these recordings, so he'll definitely give it to you, and you can listen to this podcast or this I guess a podcast or this recording again. So he'll send it to you. Shoot it Jeremy over an email. He'll send you the links. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.